In the vastness of the galaxy, where thousands of star systems thrived, conflict was inevitable. The Arthrians, a species of calculated intellect and unmatched strategy, had seen their share of war. But nothing could have prepared them for the sheer force of the Krythak. The Krythak were not a race that negotiated. They were a force of nature, ravaging entire planets, leaving nothing but ruin in their wake. The Arthrians had always prided themselves on restraint, using minimal force to achieve maximum results. Precision was their strength, and they believed it made them superior in the art of warfare. Now, the Krythak were upon them, and for the first time, the Arthrians felt outmatched. Their homeworld was on the brink of destruction. Desperation had driven them to seek aid from unlikely allies. Among them were the humans, a relatively new species in the Grand Interstellar Alliance, known for their adaptability and, more controversially, their aggression. Whispers of their brutal tactics and unorthodox strategies had reached every corner of the galaxy. The humans were always the last to retreat, the first to charge into battle, and had a reputation for employing tactics that bordered on reckless. But they had also won wars others had deemed unwinnable. The Arthrians couldn't ignore that, no matter how much they disapproved of the humans' methods. As the Krythak fleet loomed closer, preparations for retreat began. The Arthrian command calculated that they had only hours before they would be forced to abandon their homeworld. Yet, in the midst of this, the humans stood resolute. General Elena Vasquez, commanding officer of the human forces, made her position clear: retreat was not an option. To the Arthrians, it seemed like madness. Their advanced algorithms had shown that the Krythak outnumbered them by a devastating margin. Vasquez, however, appeared unfazed. "Numbers aren't the problem," she had said in the tactical briefing. "It's about making sure they don't have the chance to use them." The Arthrians were baffled. Surely the logical approach was to conserve resources, to strike at precise points, to weaken the enemy over time. But the humans weren't interested in precision. They weren't interested in attrition or calculated risk. For them, it was about ensuring total victory, at any cost. The Krythak were approaching rapidly now. The Arthrians, still adhering to their doctrine of calculated warfare, began withdrawing their forces to strategic positions, ready to defend for as long as possible before pulling back completely. The humans, however, were preparing something far more drastic. General Vasquez, standing at the helm of her command ship, gave the order. The fleet began positioning for an all-out offensive. No retreat. No fallback. It was a full commitment to annihilation. The Arthrians watched with growing unease as the humans began launching everything they had: orbital bombardments, electromagnetic pulses, long-range kinetic weapons, and weapons the Arthrians hadn't even seen before. It was as if humanity had thrown the very idea of restraint out the airlock. The Krythak descended on the Arthrian homeworld with their full might, darkening the skies with countless warships. To any other species, the battle would have seemed lost before it began. The Arthrians, who valued precision, would have withdrawn, regrouped, and engaged in a series of calculated strikes over time. But the humans had other plans. General Vasquez didn't hesitate. She knew what the Krythak were capable of. They were relentless, and so were the humans. From the first shot, it was clear that the humans didn't intend to fight a conventional battle. They intended to erase the Krythak from the field entirely. The bombardment began immediately. Massive railguns from orbital stations fired down on the Krythak ships, tearing them apart in fiery explosions. Nuclear warheads followed, detonating in high atmosphere, creating waves of devastation that tore through the enemy lines. The Krythak tried to regroup, but each time they attempted to form a defensive position, another barrage of missiles obliterated them before they could react. The Arthrians, watching from their command centers, were stunned. Their tactical simulations had suggested a more cautious approach, hitting key Krythak ships to disable them, weakening their numbers gradually. But the humans weren't interested in weakening their enemy. They were intent on obliterating them, leaving nothing standing. The Krythak, for the first time in recorded history, began to falter. Their seemingly indomitable forces were cracking under the sheer onslaught of firepower. The humans pressed their advantage, not letting up for a second. Swarms of autonomous drones descended onto the Krythak ground forces, striking them from all angles with relentless precision. But even the drones weren't precise in the way the Arthrians would have preferred. Each strike wasn't designed to incapacitate or disable, but to destroy completely. Amidst the chaos, the Arthrians couldn't help but question the strategy. It was too much. The destruction was indiscriminate. Entire areas of the planet were being rendered uninhabitable from the nuclear fallout and the continuous bombardment. There was no regard for collateral damage, no consideration for what would come after. The planet, the very home the Arthrians had sworn to protect, was being torn apart in the process of saving it. One Arthrian advisor, in a private conference with General Vasquez, voiced the growing concerns. This level of force, the advisor said cautiously, it's beyond what's necessary. We've won. The Krythak are retreating. Continuing this is excessive. Vasquez barely glanced up from the tactical display. Retreating isn't enough, she said firmly. They can retreat and come back stronger. They can rebuild. If you want to win this war, you end it. You don't give them the chance to come back. The Arthrian advisor was taken aback. Their entire species had always operated under the belief that wars should be won with as little destruction as possible, that the objective was to disable, not annihilate. But here, standing before them, was the embodiment of a different philosophy, one that didn't believe in leaving anything to chance. The Krythak, facing losses they had never anticipated, regrouped for a final desperate assault. Their ships, battered but still formidable, began to push back against the human offensive. The Arthrians observed, believing this might be the moment to reconsider their approach. Perhaps the Krythak could be reasoned with, perhaps a retreat and negotiations were still viable options. But the humans saw no such possibilities. They were committed. As the Krythak launched their counteroffensive, General Vasquez made her move. She ordered the activation of an experimental weapon, something the Arthrians hadn't been briefed on, something that went far beyond anything the Alliance had sanctioned. It was a planetary annihilation cannon, capable of destroying not just the Krythak fleet, but their entire homeworld in one fell swoop. The Arthrians were horrified. This is unnecessary, the Arthrian commander said to Vasquez, trying to grasp the human logic. The Krythak are already weakened. We can disable them, cripple their fleet. They won't be able to recover for decades. This weapon, it will do more than win the battle. It will erase them from existence. That's the point, Vasquez replied coldly, her eyes fixed on the tactical map. If we let them retreat, they'll rebuild. It's what they've always done. You think decades is enough time to prepare for their return? I don't. This war ends today. The Arthrians couldn't understand it. For them, war was a means to an end, an unfortunate necessity to ensure peace. There were always limits, boundaries that should never be crossed. You fought to defend, to preserve, and to protect, not to annihilate. But for humanity, it seemed those lines had blurred. The goal wasn't just to win, it was to make sure the enemy never posed a threat again. To the Arthrians, it was terrifying, even monstrous. Think about the repercussions, the Arthrian commander insisted. We are fighting for our world, but if you use that weapon, the cost will be greater than any victory. Entire systems could be affected. We could destabilize the region for centuries. Vasquez didn't flinch. Repercussions? There will be no repercussions. The Krythak will be gone, permanently. What happens after is just cleanup. In that moment, the Arthrians realized they were dealing with a mindset fundamentally different from their own. To the humans, overkill wasn't just a tactic, it was a philosophy. A way of ensuring that a threat was not merely defeated but eradicated entirely. It wasn't enough to disable the Krythak. They had to be wiped from existence, erased so thoroughly that no trace of them would remain. As the countdown for the annihilation cannon began, the Arthrians watched helplessly. They had always believed there was a limit to war, that some lines should never be crossed. But the humans had shown them otherwise. For humanity, survival wasn't just about winning, it was about ensuring that there would never be a need to fight the same battle again. And if that meant total destruction, so be it, the order was given, and the annihilation cannon fired. A blinding light engulfed the Krythak homeworld, followed by a shockwave that rippled across space. In a matter of seconds, the Krythak, their fleet, their cities, their entire civilization, wiped out, reduced to cosmic dust. The destruction was absolute, with nothing left behind but silence. The Arthrians could only watch, stunned by the sheer scale of what had just occurred. This was beyond anything they had ever witnessed. Entire planets, systems even, had been ravaged by the collateral damage. The Krythak were gone, but so too was the surrounding region, left scarred and uninhabitable for millennia. What was once a vibrant part of the galaxy was now nothing more than a graveyard, a testament to human overkill. In the aftermath, the Alliance forces regrouped, but there was no celebration. The Krythak threat had been neutralized, but at a cost none of the Arthrians were prepared to accept. They had wanted to protect their homeworld, but now they were left wondering if the price had been too high. The devastation extended far beyond the battlefield, into the very soul of what it meant to wage war. General Vasquez stood by her actions, unapologetic. "It's done," she said, her voice cold and final. "They'll never threaten us again. That's all that matters." The Arthrian commander, still in disbelief, approached her. "You call this victory? Look around. You've destroyed not just the enemy, but everything in their vicinity. You've ensured peace, yes, but at what cost? The galaxy will remember this day, and not for the reasons you think." Vasquez met the commander's gaze, unyielding. "The cost of victory is whatever it takes to ensure survival. You call it destruction. I call it security. The Krythak can't rebuild, and that's the only outcome that matters." For the Arthrians, the end of the war brought no relief. They had sought to preserve life, to maintain balance, even in the face of overwhelming odds. But now, they saw the human approach for what it truly was, uncompromising, unrelenting, and utterly devoid of restraint. To humanity, survival justified any means, even if those means obliterated entire civilizations. In the days that followed, the Alliance was left divided. Some saw humanity's actions as necessary, a brutal but effective end to a long-standing threat. Others, like the Arthrians, questioned whether this level of destruction could ever truly be justified. What had they become, aligning with a species that saw no limit to warfare? The Arthrian narrator, reflecting on the battle, could only conclude one thing: humans fought differently, thought differently, lived differently. To them, overkill wasn't a tactic or a strategy, it was a way of life, a survival instinct honed by centuries of conflict. They didn't just want to win, they wanted to make sure there was no possibility of ever needing to fight the same enemy again. And as they looked upon the scorched remains of what had once been the Krythak's home, the Arthrians couldn't help but wonder if they had witnessed the future of war, a future where survival had no boundaries, and victory had no limits.